Watch this.
A sitting president has visited Idaho once again. President Joe Biden touching down in the Gem State today, focusing on one topic: wildfires. It was a tale of two sides at the Boise airport. Idaho residents making themselves known as Air Force One landed. Some for, a lot against President Biden landing in Boise. And bleeding blue since 1986, Boise State's iconic field reaching a milestone today. But before it had its bright blue hue, we wanted to show you what it looked like, well, before that, like any other turf out there. For the first time in 6 years, Gem State is back in the presidential good graces, with President Joe Biden gracing us with a stop today at the National Interagency Fire Center. President Biden on a two-state tour, wanting to stop for a 2-hour visit at NIFC to learn more about these wildfires that are happening in the West all too frequently. A big component of climate change, of course, and a topic the president has hit hard the last couple of weeks with the deadly hurricanes back east. So this is kind of like the other side of the scale. A lot of pieces to this story out there today, but let's start out with Joe Paris, who is live out there at Gowan Field. With Joe, you are the only TV reporter allowed behind the scenes with the president. Now, what stuck out to you with this short, quick visit?
Brian, yeah, I felt very privileged that we're able to go behind the scenes and kind of see what was going on at NIFC as President Biden visited. Behind me is where he was the entire 2 hours that he was on the ground here in Idaho. As Brian mentioned, the National Interagency Fire Center, NIFC, that's why the president was in Boise today. He was all business, but I know one thing viewers of the 5 o'clock news might want to see, and that's Air Force One. So we'll show you the video here. Of course, a lot of talk ahead of time as Air Force One coming into the Boise airport here. Quite a scene. I can just say personally, I'd seen the Air Force One exhibit at the museum growing up as a kid. In real life, the thing is so much bigger, and I know a lot of our social media followers tweeting us pictures. Of course, eventually the plane parks and the president comes on down the stairs and he gets to work. And as Brian talked about, there was really only one topic on the table today, and that was wildfires and climate change. It's important to note that 6 days ago, the state of Idaho declared crisis standards of care in North Idaho as the system up there, the hospital system, under immense pressure from COVID. None of that was brought up today. None of that was discussed with the president. In terms of what they did speak, flanked with NIFC leaders as well as Idaho Governor Brad Little, President Joe Biden sat at NIFC and heard from local leaders about the wildfire problems and the climate change problems that have been really hitting the West, not just over the last few weeks and months, but the last few years. One message from President Biden is something needs to be done, and something needs to be done soon. President Biden also pointing out that clearly he's in the state of Idaho, a very red state. Biden's message, though, this shouldn't be a Democrat or a Republican issue. This is a weather issue that we need to do something about now. The president looking at some statistics in front of him saying that billions and billions of dollars of damage have been done to the United States because of climate change. In terms of the actual, the sideshow, I should say, here in Boise for the press corps, we were in a secure room for a while, and then we were with the president, and then they moved us back to a secure room, and then we went back out with the president. The final time we saw Joe Biden this afternoon was him meeting with Idaho smoke jumpers and then learning about the gear that they use out on the fire line, learning about the trucks they drive out on the fire line. The president and Governor Little actually had a walkthrough from some NIFC staff members showing them really the tools they use right on the fire line. Again, President Biden only here for about 2 hours, briefly exchanged some words with some local lawmakers, some Idaho Democrats, senators, and House of Representative members, telling me that they very briefly spoke with the president, but really didn't get to share more than a few words together. But before you knew it, Joe Biden was back in the air and headed over to California. Now, the tour continued from Idaho to California on the same topic. The president going to visit damage at the Calder File in California, as well as talking about climate change and weather-related action in the West. The president is scheduled to go down to Long Beach, California later to go campaign with Gavin Newsom. He's the governor of California. He's facing a recall election. There is early voting, but the actual recall election is tomorrow. In terms of the scene behind the security gates here at NIFC, Brian, it was a very tame scene, and we'll hear about the protesters coming up in just a few minutes. It was a very quick event. I know it seemed like a very long day for a lot of us out here, but when you think about it, only 2 hours. President Biden sharing some kind words with local leaders. One thing that he really hit on, Brian, is he wanted to thank the firefighters and the smoke smoke jumpers. One story I do want to share from the president, Brian, is President Biden said that at one point he really highly considered moving to the state of Idaho, even interviewing at Boise Cascade. As the name President Biden implies, though, didn't quite work out for him.
Didn't quite work out the way he'd wanted, well, in the way it worked out in history. But as you said, a quick visit, so he couldn't obviously learn everything he needed to in just those short 2 hours. But obviously he's taking what he learned today and furthering into his climate change campaign. And we'll see how that plays out. But Joe, after this highly anticipated meeting, you talked about some of the other dignitaries and state leaders that he met with. Governor Brad Little, he sent out some of his comments about this visit to the National Interagency Fire Center and with President Biden in town. Of course, there is no love lost between the two, especially right now with the COVID circumstances in Idaho and the way that President Biden is mandating vaccines across the country. Governor said since 2/3 of Idaho's public land is managed by the federal government, it is important to keep these open lines of communication going from the top down. He went on to say he has plenty that he disagrees on with the president. And right now, though, one thing he does agree with President Biden is the need to build a more fire-resilient ecosystem by protecting lives, creating jobs, and, of course, improving the landscape. Governor went on to say that while federal firefighting agencies are a big help in our area, so is the Department of Justice. Governor Little saying, quote, "We need the president's help with minimizing unproductive lawsuits so that we can get fully agreed upon plans implemented and reducing the fuel load so we're not unduly endangering firefighters and our communities." Governor Little thanked the president for meeting with NIFC and all of our firefighters for all of their hard work. He says he and the other Western governors look forward to continuing to work on the land and fire management issues that are facing the West and have been for years. Meanwhile, Boise Mayor Lauren McLean also releasing a statement following her meeting with President Biden. Short 2 hours, we got to see a lot of people. He says, or she says, President Biden commended Boise's goal to be a carbon neutral community by 2050. And encouraged the city to keep pushing forward with that goal. She also thanked the president for coming to visit, says she is re-energized to create a city for everyone, as she says. So you can see that behind Air Force One there sitting on the tarmac. The smoke from the fires burning in California didn't disappoint today, offering a thin veil of why this has been such an important topic, illustrating why the wildfires in the West, why President Biden chose to stop by NIFC. NIFC, for those of you who may not know, is the National Interagency Fire Center, where they make all the critical decisions when it comes to managing and supporting wildfires across the country, but they just tend to happen out here in the West a lot more. Wherever there is a fire, it is on their radar. They're located right next to the Boise airport, which is why the president was able to meet with them and never really had to leave the airport campus. Wildland firefighting is their primary objective, but NIFC also supports other kinds of emergency responses, such as floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, riots, and even terrorist attacks. But when it comes to firefighting, NIFC is not only the first to respond. Wildfire suppression in the U.S. is built on a 3-tiered system of support. NIFC would be at the top, so before they step in, local agencies are first asked to respond, and that falls on the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service. The dispatchers with the first tier are in charge of juggling what those resources might need to be or be sent to what emergency within that area. If the fire keeps growing, Tier 2 is activated. And there are 10 geographical units across the country that make up Tier 2. They move resources around their sections to help support whatever Tier 1 has chosen to do, how they've chosen to fight this. Then once those resources are exhausted, NIFC will then get involved. And NIFC can send support from any part of the country to another part of the country.
They have been dispatching things like equipment, such as engines, dozers, trying to find crews, like hand crews, hotshot crews. They have an aircraft desk that supports, where the aircraft is going as well. So, and supplies.
We kind of live by the mantra, you fight the fire you got. So if we're not getting fires and somebody else is, we need to be helping them.
Well, NIFC has been in Boise since 1965, created by the USDA Forest Service, BLM, and National Weather Service. They saw the need to work together to coordinate all of these things that, go into fighting wildfires, and that's why they put that there. Currently, there are 22 active large fires burning in Idaho. More than 226,000 acres have been burned so far just this season. Now that the president has been briefed, well, maybe there could be some more relief on the way to help us and the rest of the West fight these fires. So people gathering outside NIFC today to protest President Biden's arrival in Boise. Small crowd, about 1,000 or so, pretty big crowd actually. Starting at 8 a.m., they started to gather outside the front gates for a lot of reasons. But one unifying message the group had is, well, they all stand against President Biden. Andrew Bartline now joins us live. Andrew, you were where those protests were, kind of smack in the middle of it. What did you see out there today?
Yeah, this is a big protest, Brian. You said over 1,000 people. I was at the St. Luke's and Meridian protest a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago. That was reported 1,300. This was definitely bigger than that. This was the thick of it. There's a man on this rock with a megaphone blasting out chants, people responding. They couldn't go past this crosswalk, but if we look down the road, we'll pan the camera for you, you're gonna see a Denny's sign. Why that's important? That's how far the protest stretched. It went all the way down the street. The Boise police had to come out and sort of separate people to make sure cars could get in and out. Now, I talked to protesters about the different reasons why they decided to show up, whether it was the recent Afghanistan evacuation and how that was executed, or the recent federal vaccine mandate for businesses with more than 100 employees. Protesters want to voice their concerns, and they oppose, the current administration.
We were only expecting about 20 to 50 people is what I expected to find. There are thousands of people here, so it's really uplifting to me. I am so happy that there are so many people out here that are anti-Biden and pro-Trump, but it even doesn't have to be Trump. It's his policies that we are all standing for.
Now, there was no talk at the protest about why the president was in town and his meeting with NIFSI. The reasons for this protest were completely unrelated to the president's business while visiting town. I can tell you there was very little disagreement between the protesters. I only saw one man that kind of got heckled a little bit for wearing a mask. The Boise police did escort him through the crowd. Now, the Boise police was not the only group here. The Nampa police was there as well, along with Idaho State Police helped managing this crowd. And I talked to a couple of protesters about what success looks like with this protest. They said they just want to be heard. They want President Biden to know that they don't support him and they don't welcome him here. Now, I actually ran into the public information officer for NIFSI coincidentally before I hopped on air. She told me that when Biden made the trip from Gowan over here to NIFSI, he was never in a position where he could see through the gate and see the protest. Brian?
So therefore, he couldn't see the signs that say that Trump won the last election, even though there's no evidence of that. And it's still interesting, my body, my choice, and they're heckling a man for wearing a mask, even though he chose to wear a mask during a pandemic. Is that what you said, Andrew?
Yeah, there's a man up sort of in the thick of it where I am roughly. I saw him maybe, I don't know, 1,000 feet that direction further down the road toward that Denny's sign that we told you about. And two police officers with Boise police were escorting him back to where the cars were parked, I imagine, so he could leave safely.
Okay, interesting. All right, thank you very much, Andrew. Well, meanwhile, on the other side of the airport, or pretty much any other side of the airport, or that was not Gowan Field, or outside of Gowan Field that was not featuring the entrance to NIFSI, it was kind of like a tale of two sides of the airport. It was the worst of times, according to the protesters on the north side, which you just heard Andrew tell you about. And it was the best of times for those pulled off the side of the road who just wanted to see the world's most famous airplane fly into Boise, something a Boeing 747 with an iconic presidential seal has done with nearly every sitting president since George H.W. Bush in the early 1990s. They started stacking up outside the airport and off the side of the road.
Oh, we just thought it would be really cool to see Air Force One land, you know.
About 2 hours before Biden's expected arrival.
Well, number one, it's the President of the United States, and number two, it's Air Force One. I mean, great combination.
Two good reasons to walk out of work or even skip school.
Are you supposed to be in class right now? According to my AP government teacher, I have permission. So I think we're all right.
17-year-old Connor Richardson wasn't the only kid not in class.
Yeah.
Angie Johnson brought her 3.
We actually talked to the principal and he said it was fine.
A field trip she thought of just this morning. So her daughter Grace thought,
Well, I better get dressed.
young ones and eager ones, all hoping to get a glimpse of Air Force One.
It's a 747, the queen of the skies, so it's pretty special.
Like a lot of others out here, Connor considers himself an admirer of all things aviation, with a tilt toward taking pictures.
Still looking for the elusive Air Force One photo. Yeah, well, hopefully it comes today.
And he thought he put himself in the perfect position.
You've already scoped it out? Yeah.
Until about 10 minutes to touchdown,
How far out do you think I'll call?
a plane took off in the opposite direction. Which meant...
They just called to the other side.
Going to the other side?
Yeah.
Sweet. You heading over there?
Yeah.
We were all on the wrong side to get the right picture. And that meant we and pretty much everyone else had to make the 4-mile trek around Gowan Field to the other side of the airport.
That's it.
And with moments to spare, Air Force One arrived from the east. While we almost did, It was a moment 5-year-old Tate and her cousin Piper wouldn't have missed for the world. Even if that moment only lasted seconds.
I mean, that's the Air Force One, to see it fly over, I mean, that's amazing.
It was an experience that won't quickly be forgotten.
All right, we gotta go. Get you to school.
Or found in a classroom.
Absolutely.
I hope the president comes to Boise again.
Well, young Tate, his first year in office, and he's already made his first trip to the Gem State as president. Mr. Biden has been to Idaho a couple of times over the years as vice president in 2009 and during his campaign for president in 2019. But today's 2-hour stop was the first time Air Force One has been here since 2015 when President Obama showed up for a speech at Boise State University. Well, President Obama called that the fourth quarter of his presidency when he spoke to a crowd of thousands at the Kavin Williams Sports Complex at Boise State.
Here at the home of the team, with the most famous Statue of Liberty play in history, I don't need to remind you the big things happen late in the fourth quarter.
Well, from the fourth quarter to the opening kickoff, the first presidential visit to Idaho was shortly after the Gem State became a state. President Benjamin Harrison, who signed the law making Idaho the 43rd state in the Union, he stopped by, even planted a tree at the State House. Presidents Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft also visited Idaho while in office and also planted trees near the Harrison's tree. Then in 1964, President Lyndon Johnson visited the Idaho National Laboratory in eastern Idaho. And since then, since 1964 and President Johnson, every sitting president has visited Idaho at least once while in office, except one, President Trump, who broke that streak by never stepping foot in Idaho in his 4 years as president. President Bush, 1 and 2, both came to Idaho several times. Back in 2005, the younger spoke at the Idaho Center in Nampa. And he talked about policy, the Iraq War, and thanked several service members in attendance and their families. But he also did have a more lighthearted moment when he offered this advice for then Nampa Mayor Tom Dale.
Mr. Mayor, thanks. You didn't ask for any advice, but I'll give you some anyway. Fill the potholes.
Classic. Well, wonder what he would think of those potholes now in Canyon County. This was actually Biden's second visit to the Gem State. His other visit, as you mentioned, came in 2009. It was then he attended the Special Olympics Winter Games at Quest Arena, which is now Idaho Central Arena. He watched some of the events, and then he also presented medals to the athletes. 35 years ago today, September 13th, 1986, the Boise State Broncos played Humboldt State and annihilated them 74-0, according to BSU historian Tom Scott. Almost as impressive as the apparent unstoppable offense of the Broncos was what the Broncos and Lumberjacks actually played on that Saturday. That day was the debut of what would become the well-known symbol of Boise State. That summer, blue turf was installed as part of the upgrade of what was then a 26-year-old Bronco Stadium. This day in history, Mark Johnson brings us this epic and iconic 208 redial.
What do you think of AstroTurf?
I think football should be played on natural grass.
That sentiment echoed loudly through the halls of football facilities all over the country back in the late 60s and the early 70s. But soon, man-made carpets would outnumber natural turf 3-1 in the college and the pro ranks, and suddenly a new era of football had begun. Now, nearly 2 decades later, a similar cry can be heard.
Well, I think football should be played on green turf.
Now, the reason for the outburst from some members of the community lies here, at Boise State's Lyle Smith Field, home of the orange and blue Boise State Broncos. This is also home of America's very first blue football field. The idea was the brainchild of the athletic department, who felt blue AstroTurf combined with orange jerseys would create some added publicity for the university, and it has. Not all of it favorable. Sports Illustrated, for example, suggesting the school hire a design consultant, that to rid them of their color scheme.
It's really good for the league. I think I think that all the coaches should wear earrings. I think we all should play on different colored fields. I think everyone should have a beard.
Kids don't care what they play on. They just want to play. That's the way coaches are. Doesn't make any difference if we go play Weber State in a dirt field or play them in a grass field or turf field.
Looking a bit like a small lake in the middle of the city, some are concerned about ducks crashing afternoon games. Hunters have already been told it is off limits. The carpet will get its first test in front of the home crowd September 13th, and at $600,000. Fans in Boise, Idaho are already saying the new blue at BSU, like it or not, is here to stay. In Boise, Mark Johnson reporting for NBC News.
And KTVB, young Mark Johnson. By the way, they replaced that AstroTurf a few times since then, all blue, of course. In 1995, they put the AstroTurf back in, but by 2002, players, well, they tired of the rug burn, so they went with AstroPlay in 2002, which is what you're seeing right there. It's the same concept of the current field with the rubber pellets and the plastic blades of grass, but by 2008, they switched to a field turf surface, which has been replaced a couple of times since then, in 2010 because of a reflection problem, and again in 2019 because of wear and tear. They're currently playing on their 6th version of the blue, of which they are now 191 and 47 on that blue.
Over to me.
All right, getting a couple comments sent in today about what we said about the protesters standing outside NIFC when President Joe Biden was there to learn about Western wildfires and about there's a bias of some sort. And when I asked about it, he said regarding his coverage of the protests outside the airport, he insulted protesters that had Trump won signs saying the election was not stolen, which it was, he says. Still waiting for some legitimate proof of that. Brian, what those 2,000 protesters tells me is that 218,000 of us weren't protesters. As a retired wildland firefighter, I'm proud the president visited NIFC. See you tomorrow.